Well, good evening, everybody. We are going to call this special city council meeting to order July 24th, 2023 at 4:31 p.m. If you all would please stand and join me in saying the pledges. Thank you very much. Tammy, do we have any public comments for tonight? No? Fantastic. So we will now jump into what we have on the agenda. We have the budget discussion first, and we do have a PD&Z meeting that starts at 6 p.m. And we do have an item on the regular agenda, so if we can just make sure to leave just a little bit of room at the end to take action on that. So we have discussion on the fiscal year 2023-2024 proposed budget. And so we have kind of three things tonight. One, I just want to take a moment just to kind of set the scene, set the table in the sense of kind of where we're at in the timeline for what's to come. I know Councilman Lands has something that he's been working on that we regretfully did not get to at the last meeting that he wanted to discuss tonight, which was the thoroughfare plan, which ties into the budget because to update the thoroughfare plan, you have to have the funds for that. And then at that point, we'll turn it over to Dan, who's been working with finance and the department heads on giving us a presentation tonight. Councilman Jerome Hudson is not going to be here tonight, so he asked that we not have all the fun without him. So we'll make sure to do that. But first off, just want to say thank you to staff for all of the presentations up until this point. The effort that you guys have put into it is much appreciated. Instead of the budget just being numbers on a piece of paper that we see, we actually understand what goes into the budget, what happens behind the scenes, how those numbers are people doing real jobs, making a real difference. And I've heard from a lot of people in the community that they've been very appreciative of it, that they have gained an additional insight and perspective into what happens within these walls and out in the field. But I know that it's been a very rushed timeline, and so going into next year, we're going to follow more of a true budget timeline and schedule to allow for some additional collaboration there. But from a timeline standpoint, council for us, especially the new council members, city charter states that on August 1st, the city manager is to present to us the proposed budget. At that point, it kicks off a few meetings that might need to happen based off of the tax rate that we are going to choose to potentially go with. State law dictates that you have to have public hearings if you want to adopt a tax rate above the no new revenue rate. For us, we can take as much time or as little time as needed, but the budget has to be adopted and the tax rate has to be set by the last day in September. If that does not happen, generally speaking, you revert back to the current year's budget. And there's some, Bobby could walk us through what that process would look like, but I'm very confident we'll be able to, with all the work we've done up to this point, be able to come to a conclusion in the time that's necessary. But what we have before us tonight is the first of potentially two meetings. We might, depending on how tonight goes, have a meeting at our next city council meeting, and then of course have the time needed in August and September to continue the discussion. But staff's really looking for some direction from us tonight, based off of the compiling of the results and all of the asks that they have. One, what tax rate are we looking to adopt? Because the tax rate ultimately drives how much money is available in the budget for staff to then begin to prioritize the needs. And as needs are prioritized, my commitment, and I believe I can speak for all of council to staff, to the city employees, is that if we can't fund certain things in this year's budget, we're committed to forecasting out needs into the future and taking methodical and strategic steps to meet the needs that our city employees have. But they've been working on compiling all of the asks that have been made. Tonight we have to talk and provide direction. What do we want to do for the tax rate? What are things that we want to see as council priorities in the budget? And if there's items that have been presented that we want to say, let's hold off for right now. Let's have that conversation, because there's little less than 2 weeks before Dan has to present his very first budget as the interim city manager. And we want to make sure that we provide very clear direction to Dan and the team, so that way they can get to work on those items. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Councilman Lands to present some of the discussion that he would like to have regarding the thoroughfare plan. David?
Mayor and Council, I wish to discuss the City of Manvel's Thoroughfare Plan, which was developed for the City of Manvel by the engineering firm Freese and Nichols in 2015. But first, bear with me, I would like to share a bit of history that will segue into the Thoroughfare Plan. Europe began the tragic fighting of World War I in August of 1914. However, the U.S. did not get involved in the conflict until almost 3 years later, in 1917. On November 11, 1918, the war ended with a peace treaty that was signed between the Allies and Germany. This day was called Armistice Day. It is now referred to as Veterans Day. In this approximate 18-month period of U.S. involvement, the U.S. had over 53,000 service personnel killed in action, over 63,000 non-combatant-related deaths, 204,000 wounded. Now, back in the day, Manvel had citizens by the name of Patterson. Their name is where the name Patterson Road originated. My wife, Carla, and I live at the corner of Old Chocolate Bayou and Patterson Road. Our property was the Patterson home place. Lining the front of our property along Patterson Road are many majestic oak trees. The story goes that Miss Jeffy Patterson planted the line of oak trees on that Armistice Day in 1918. She planted these trees in honor of our fallen heroes of the war. About 20 years ago, Carla came across this property and then found herself coming by on many occasions to view the beautiful trees that Miss Jeffy had planted. One day, Carla sat at the stop sign at Patterson and Old Chocolate and prayed. She said, "Lord, if you would bless me with this property, I promise you I will love and honor these magnificent trees forever." Well, not long after, Carla was blessed with the ownership of Miss Jeffy's trees. Love was already in these trees, and more love was coming. We have had many, many people come by and admire the trees which gracefully branch over Patterson Road. The long swaying branches of the trees are now covered with a wonderful growth of resurrection fern. When the trees have received a nice rain shower, the resurrection fern comes to life in a vibrant green, and the row of trees become even more majestic and beautiful. On the tree's 100th birthday in 2019, we began to hold tree birthday celebrations, not only to honor the majestic historic trees planted so long ago, but as a continual honor and remembrance of our servicemen and women ever since. We call our event the Manvel's Historic Trees Celebration. We hire a food truck and serve free plates to any and all that wish to come by and say hello and enjoy the trees for a bit. In the past celebration, we have averaged approximately 150 people. We have neighbors that come and help on this event, and their involvement is gratifying to say the least. Don Hennessy contributes his U.S. flags to line the row of our trees for the event. Various neighbors, such as Jenny Quaid, the Rossis, the Booths, the Andrescos, provide cookies and desserts as an added treat. First responders are always our VIPs, and I strive to get quick photos with our police officers, firemen, and paramedics. This year will be our 5th annual celebration, and I'm planning a special one indeed. And this year I have high hopes of giving away 5 30-gallon oak trees so people can plant them and begin their own remembrances of days gone by. I hope to be able to develop and provide a history link for citizens to share the stories and perhaps a photo of their loved ones who were in the service, for I wish to compile a Manvel Military Service Personnel brochure to be handed out at future events. I can see this brochure growing through the years of continual wonderful additions. Now let's bring in the Manvel Thoroughfare Plan of 2015. The Thoroughfare Plan reflects possible ways that the city could widen existing roads and install new roads for the benefit of traffic flow. In this Thoroughfare Plan is the proposal to change several roads on the rural side of Manvel, such as our Patterson Road. The proposal is to change Patterson Road, which is currently 20 feet wide, into a parkway. A parkway is 120 feet wide right-of-way. That's 4 lanes of traffic. 2 lanes in one direction, 2 lanes in another direction, a median in between, and sidewalks along the road. This proposal would require that Manvel's historic trees would have to be sacrificed for the sake of traffic flow. Not only would the trees be sacrificed, but the sidewalk of the higher speed parkway would be a mere 17 feet from our front porch. Now, I came up here with a tape measure the other day, and that desk to that desk is 21 feet. So it'd be closer than that. And that's not all. There are several homes along Patterson Road that would have to be bulldozed down to make room for this parkway. A tragedy for the citizens, for our neighbors, an imminent nightmare. And I would like to add that Patterson Road is currently a dead-end road, ending in front of the Rossi home to the east end of us. The plan shows a proposed road connecting this dead end of Patterson to Masters Road, meandering yet through another individual's property. And in this plan, there's a proposed road variation rerouting Old Chocolate and Patterson further eastward to where it is now, cutting our next-door neighbor's property in half, doing away with the current home of her beautiful horses. The west end of Patterson, which dead ends into Del Bello, is the property of our friend David Jones. I'm sure you know the property where the camel Samson and the zebra Barcode lives. This plan shows Patterson Road forging through and splitting this property as well, destroying David's beautiful home site, his invested years and years of care, and the home of his beloved pets. I am sure that the engineering firm that the city hired in 2015 had good intentions of the proposal. But I'd be very surprised if they drove around and actually envisioned the far-reaching impact that these broad strokes would have on our citizens and their properties. I cannot say that I recognize any thought of compassion in this thoroughfare plan, but I do understand that compassion was probably not a given criteria. This issue was one of the main reasons I ran for city council. It is a personal issue not only for me and Carla, but for all of our neighbors along Patterson Road, as well as other roads in this plan that needs addressing. I took on this challenge years ago to address this proposed thoroughfare plan, and I am here today to continue to say that we must do our best to preserve our rural side of Manvel, with our rural landowners in our hearts and on our consciences. While campaigning, I heard from many of these citizens who shared their concerns on this issue. This proposed plan could alter the lives of many Manvel citizens drastically, destroying their valued property they hold dear. I firmly believe there are valuable alternatives for traffic flow that will not do the damage to current property owners that this proposal entails. In fact, this proposed plan has already affected some individuals already. Case in point, across the corner from our property was a vacant lot that was purchased a couple of years ago by a man named Guru Cigaretti. Guru is a doctor in Houston, an anesthesiologist, I do believe. Guru bought the property so he could build a little getaway for his family. While all streets have required building setbacks, Guru had to follow the setback from this thoroughfare plan, further back than the noted setback on Patterson Road, for the sake of the proposed plan. Guru was able to make this requirement work. The prior owners of the property, who also had the land for a couple of years and also had high hopes of building a home there, were not so lucky. They could not viably make this required setback work, and they decided to abandon their hopes of building and sell. Folks, this is overreach. We cannot do this. We cannot force landowners to follow larger setbacks based on an assumed road enlargement. I'm concerned about the legalities of making citizens follow this. I wish for City Council and City staff to address this proposed thoroughfare plan as soon as possible. I wish to see that Patterson Road is removed from this plan and to look at the other proposed roadways in this plan that needs removing or revising. It's easy to say, as I have been told in the past, that this roadway plan would never happen to Patterson, at least not for the next 20 years or so. My wish is for it to never happen, not to our 104-year-old trees of today, nor to the 125-year-old Manvel's historic trees of our grandchildren's future. Thank you, council, for your time and your consideration for the requested action on this item.
Councilman Lands, thank you for presenting that item and for your passion for not only something that affects you and your family, but also a lot of people in Manvel. Dan, can you speak a little bit to what the process would look like to update the thoroughfare plan? Since it was last done almost, we're getting close to 10 years, it's bound to be time to update it in general.
It is, and it's actually in the budget this year, along with the comp plan update. We just had sort of a kickoff meeting last week, I guess, to talk about, can we combine the strategic plan, the vision casting from that into the comp plan and the thoroughfare plan, kind of all three of those combined in together. So it's actually already a budgeted project. So we're going to probably do an RFQ, most likely, to go out for qualifications this time to. Engineering requires that anyway. Proposal, you're looking at the bottom line dollar figure, but this is going to be, we're going to need sort of some specialists to really present a good team to the city to look at this all combined. Did I capture that well?
Yes.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Do we have a timeline for when we might go out for RFQ?
I think Brooke's working on the timeline right now. It's pretty short, actually. I challenged us, while he's in here too, I think he was, to try and get this going before October 1. I don't know if that's possible, but that's the challenge that we set forth.
So are you talking about starting from scratch with a new plan, or just taking this one and revising it? Not going through Freese Nichols for a revision?
Correct.
Okay.
Because the challenge that we have is not just looking at what the current impacts are, but also the future. What's going to happen 20, 30, 40 years in the future. And these just aren't lines on a piece of paper, but these are people's livelihoods, these are people's properties. And I think there's an opportunity to approach it this time with a little bit of a different perspective than maybe what happened previously.
And I could add to that too. So there was a thoroughfare plan before even the 2015. It was part of the 07 comp plan, which was done completely by planners, and it wasn't perfect. No plan is perfect, but at least it got some ideas going, got them on paper, and I'm sure, like you said, that they probably didn't look at on the ground stuff. Some of it you can't even get to. Now maybe you can, but at least the 2015 had some engineering behind it. But again, we've progressed in the last 8 years quite a bit, right? So developers have built some of the roads that were contemplated. Some of the alignments have changed. We did a small update internally in 2021, I guess, to capture some of the things that were just, Manvel Town Center kind of realigned Kirby slightly. Meridiana Parkway got slightly realigned from what was originally imagined. So it's not out of the realm of, conception to maneuver these different roads and look at different alternatives. So that's completely it's just part of what needs to be done, of course. Sure.
Good with that. Right. Do I have any other comments or questions from council?
That is fascinating. I had no idea. I've voiced to you and your wife many times how we used to cycle back there and just stare in complete awe of those trees and that property. There's nothing like it. I haven't seen anything like it anywhere around Manvel. What do we have to do to claim it a historic site? I think that would be a good step in the right direction.
You really can't do like a historical marker for a tree. You can do like a marker of interest. We've started to check into that. We didn't get very far with it, but it is something we would like to see develop. And just across the street from us too is a little house that supposedly it's one of the oldest homes in Manvel. It's in poor shape. I mean, it's if it's not addressed soon, it's going to have to be demolished. But that could be a historical marker site, which Manvel has one or two, I think. But I've tried to encourage the landowner to sell and let me, restore that home and make it a historic site. But he's not interested. I think it's probably just going to go by the wayside.
So the other thing that I just cannot turn a blind eye to is that in our subdivision as well, and, Mayor Dan Davis lives there as well, and we have heard from many, many, many citizens that they are not happy with the thoroughfare plan going on Charlotte all the way through. And I know Councilman Lakery also lives on Charlotte, right? Yes. And so I can assume that that's not something that you would like either. So I do think it's time to maybe revise that, just for the sake of protecting children. There's now a slow children are in our neighborhood. And so can you imagine people flying down that road at 50 miles an hour? So yeah, I'd like to see the numbers, and I believe that it would be in our city's best interest to have a brand new firm look at what that looks like to create new thoroughfares and what that pricing would be, because you just can't compare back then to now. In addition to what he just stated, is having eyes on the ground and knowing, okay, these areas are not up for thoroughfare. But we definitely do need some type of plan, because the growth is coming. Traffic is already driving us crazy on Highway 6. Del Bello's getting very congested, and there's only so much leeway we have going around a lot of those congested roads. So it does need to be looked at. So I'm excited to see what we can collaborate on.
Maybe we can just do it in-house and have HR do that for us as well. What do you think, Chad? No, I'm playing. But I think there's some opportunities here. I think there's opportunities for a multi-use off-road trail system, and to really evaluate the feasibility of what the lines are on the piece of paper. So look forward, Dan, to seeing that timeline and seeing, just make sure to keep us in the loop there.
Sure, and if you'd like, I could just point you to in the budget, the line item specifically for the comp plan for this year's budget is $150,000, and the thoroughfare plan is $120,000. So combined, we've got $270,000, which is why we were thinking we could sort of include all three of those together in one plan. So.
And that's a great lead way into you presenting the budget for us. And I think there's opportunities here within the budget to look at unused funds, such as what Dan just mentioned, that maybe weren't expended, such as the deputy fire marshal position that Joe's been trying to fill. Carrying those funds over, does that open up additional one-time funds? Kind of really analyzing that, doing a micro analysis there, and looking at things such as TERS, service collection fees, and other items that can produce additional revenue for the city that we've not recognized in the past. But Dan, my ask to you is that if you have specific questions for council,
sure,
or if we are providing mixed signals based off of direction, hone in on that, make sure to let us know, and we'll provide clear direction.
Thank you.
So cheers.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. So you've heard from the police department, fire, community services, development services, IT, capital projects, and human resources. So there's one pretty significant department left. That's obviously the administrative services or finance department. And Rosie's going to give us a presentation tonight. But I did want to mention, because we've used every single moment of every workshop that we've had thus far. And we've got a little bit of time, we've got about an hour left tonight. So if there are questions that council has of any of the presentations, aside from Jessica, she's the only one not here tonight, but I know Joe Murray finished at the whistle, I think, right at 6 o'clock that evening or whatever. So if there are any lingering questions, we'd love to field those at some point this evening. But I think, Rosie, if you're ready, we're ready for finance department. And everyone should have this one on your screens. Were y'all able to access that?
Yeah, maybe. What was the password?
22.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I am representing the Finance Department today. What does the Finance Department do?
I was there.
So, Rosie, can you tell us just a little bit about, because you're new onto the scene, kind of just a little bit of your history, where you came from, while we wait for others to log in?
Sure. I currently came from City of Hidalgo, down South Texas. I have 30 years plus in accounting. I'm aging myself, of course. 15 of those were in the private world, but the private world was with a defense contractor. So I was actually working with the government even then. After that, I started with the City of Hidalgo. I do have my master's degree in accounting. My goals have always been to be as accurate and as honest as possible. I've been in Edinburgh all my life. And instead of the kids leaving the house, the mother left the house, left the kids behind. Actually, what happens is I never spread my wings. I got married young, so I decided my kids are old. The youngest is in college. Now it's time for me to spread my wings, become what I can really become, and grow with it. And God has always provided that option for me.
Well, we're lucky to have you. I know you've been jumping into the deep end, so I appreciate what you've been doing. I think we're all ready for the presentation now, so fire away.
Perfect. Finance department, what do we do? Currently, the finance department consists of 3 employees, including myself. I have a great team. They're very knowledgeable in what they do, and they learn fast. What does the finance department do? We safeguard and account for all the city financial assets, from money to roads to infrastructure to anything that we need to keep track of. We are very customer-based. Our customer is the residents, our vendors, our employees. Finance is typically 5 different departments: accounts payable, which pays our bills; payroll, which pays our employees; collections, collect the money coming in from all different areas; and the accounting, which is the budgeting, the record keeping, the fun stuff. And then, of course, our utility billing. Our goals is to strengthen our education and within our department so that we can promote from within. That's what my short-term goal. Long-term goal is to streamline some of our processes, educate our department heads in order to be able to use the new software that we currently have so that they don't have to do everything manually, and create a succession plan. What finance is currently asking for is an accounting technician, which would be doing accounts payable and utility billing. That way, the senior people can concentrate on teaching the younger ones, so by the time we're ready to retire, they can step in without any blink of an eye. We'd like to increase our training budget for that purpose, send some of our employees to the GFOA conferences, which are very educational. Any questions from the finance department on what we do?
I think, Rosie, you hold the record for the fastest department presentation. So congratulations.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
I appreciate that. Do I have any comments or questions from council?
Rosie, I love your story.
Thank you.
And I just love that you spread your wings and flew. Thank you for sharing that. The training that you're adding in there, I would like to know a little bit, just a tad bit, maybe like just a quick summary of what they get when they get this training. I'm a big proponent of training, continual training, so I think that's fascinating. So
GFOAT is basically our Government Financial Officer Association for the state of Texas. And what they do is they go out there and teach people who have some accounting background, government accounting. They guide them, they give them certification, which that certification is the equivalent of a CPA in the normal world, and the GFOA certification is for the government world. Yes.
Anyone else?
Just a word of encouragement. If you survive 15 years of finance and military contracting, you can handle all of this. I did 20 years of military finance, so I know you can do it.
Yes, I was working with the warning company, the MRE suppliers.
Oh, God.
Yes.
You'll be fine.
All right, well, thank you, Rosie. We appreciate you. Thank you very much. I think we'll either, are you staying up here or are we passing it over?
I am staying up
All
here.
right, there you go.
And this is why I'm going to go and hide behind something strong. City of Manvel, 23-24 preliminary budget. This is very preliminary since we have not gotten the property tax levies yet. On the screen, you see the general fund. Of course, it is very small. Total revenues that I'm budgeting currently is at $10,870,000. Expenditures, though, are at $15 million. And that, what I have done is I budgeted conservatively both on the revenues and the expenses. I did include those smaller asks that the departments were wanting, like those line item increases, because they didn't have enough money for the chemicals, the line increases for the fuel and car maintenance, some of the smaller software licensing issues. Those small things is what I included. I also calculated a 3% increase cost of living for all employees with this budget number.
Would it be okay if we kind of with each slide ask some questions?
I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay, so you said 3% COLA,
Yes, sir.
and then I see here we're not recognizing the $800,000 for the transfer in revenue within this year's budget, but that's been recognized in past year's budgets.
Exactly, for this last year. We didn't do it in the past. It was a one-time thing. And really, it's not recommended unless you have very much fund balance in there. You try to keep your fund balance high, so when you go out for bonds or anything, you keep your rating.
Absolutely. And then I see here it's recognizing new franchise fees for $595. Can you highlight where that comes from?
The franchise fees is not new. It's just we're not calculating it based on this year's numbers. Hopefully, we do get them completely 100% this year. But
Yes,
they tend to come in towards the end of the fiscal year, so we don't know the real numbers till about August or September.
My apologies. Yeah, I looked at the variance as being zero, and my mind was playing tricks on me there. So one of the, I guess, the big questions that I have is the ad valorem tax revenue is down by about $300,000. Yet people can attest to the fact that all of our values have gone up. So can you explain a little bit, highlight why we're estimating and this is of course very conservative, but kind of the calculation as to why it's a drop there?
What I've done is use this year's numbers. I based them on what the values were. Plus remember, a lot of the values go towards the TERS. So that's property tax revenue that does not go to the city, but to the TERS. So, and most of your increase is in the TERS zone. That's why it was calculated very conservative based on the numbers that we collected today. TERS last year got a transfer of $176,000. This year, the last number that I got for county were over $600,000. So most of your money is going to be going to the TERS.
Okay, so keeping, even with the value increase, because my home saw a $90,000 increase, we're gonna, if we kept the tax rate the exact same at 57 cents, we would see a property tax revenue decrease.
Yes, because part of that also goes to the debt service. And remember, we got another series at the end of this, beginning of this fiscal year, on Series 23. So part of that has to cover now that debt.
So we're dropping, so just for the public's sake, your tax rate is made up of two portions, your M&O portion, which is your maintenance and operation, and your
Yes.
INS, which is your debt. So as your INS has to increase, which whenever the city recently issued debt of $35 million, interest is $40 million, that meant that the INS portion has to increase. So because your INS portion has to increase, your M&O portion has to decrease to offset that, which is where that comes from.
That's
Okay.
correct.
I don't have any further questions about this slide. Thank you, Rosie. Does anybody else on council?
I'm sorry, did I hear you say you put in the cost of living proposals for everybody?
Yes, 3% across the board.
Okay, so that was just, is the cost of living like 4%?
Yes, it is, but I'm going on the conservative side.
Okay.
Now, council wishes to give more, then we will, more than happy to accept the
No.
additional cost of
Okay,
living.
did the new positions are put in there?
No, sir. No, sir. No new positions, no major equipment. The only thing I put in there is what we have now, plus the small asks that needed to be so that we could become solvent in the year. For example, you know how the utility was requesting a larger chemical line? It's needed.
Yeah.
It's not a want, so I increased his. The streets part of it, the paving, we increased it from 300 to 400,000 so that we can do some of that paving projects that need to be done.
Okay, so when are we going to, if the numbers for the person, the staffing and stuff, when does that get inserted? And when do we get to talk about that, right? Does
At
make
that
sense?
point, I believe we're supposed to get the actual property numbers the first week of August, Tammy? August?
It's supposed to be by August the 7th, however, it could possibly be the next day. We may cause y'all to have a special meeting, but I will know that closer to the 7th.
But that's when we'll see those, because we've heard everybody, right? Everybody had a want and a need,
Yes.
right? And so when are those numbers put in there for the proposed?
When we find the extra revenues, and once we
Well,
look at the property tax,
So so when those numbers come in, that's when you're going to know,
I can squeeze in so much, we can buy this much, we have to look at another alternative. I'm already looking for the rates with government capital, which finance some of your major equipment on short-term loans with
Right,
good
right.
rates.
so yeah, I guess the county's going to send us the numbers, right? So low, medium, high, whatever, right? And then you can start playing with each category?
Exactly, sir.
Okay.
And wherever the council directs me that we want to concentrate, for example, if we want to get more officers, or do we want to fit the other staff wants, whatever, whatever orientation you give me towards that.
Right,
That's where
okay.
we'll fit in those numbers.
Rosie, if you could talk just for a minute, so the preliminary numbers are what, 2.1 billion or something like that of overall property value in Manvel, significantly more than last year at 1.4 billion. However, the majority of that new 700 million is all in Meridiana, so it's all part of the TERS, so all of that property tax goes to the TERS. That's why we're not realizing this huge, windfall that if that's what we were expecting, it's earmarked for something else, unfortunately.
And then the challenge with the debt that was just issued is within this year's budget, we have to find basically $1 million from somewhere in order to meet just the yearly debt payment. So right off the bat, not only was a lot of the growth seen within the TERS, but then we have to find an additional $1 million to be able to pay off the 3 buildings that are being built. Now, Dan, can you speak to just a little bit the potential for that TERS service fee? Is that something that we think that could be a reality here?
The clawback, it actually already is. Rosie checked into it. Can you kind of tell them about your findings on that?
Basically, I went back to the start of the TERS, and they were calculating the clawback, and they were adjusting the money coming in. It doesn't look like it might have been done last year, so that's the only, that doesn't look like we got back the clawback.
Okay, and can you explain just a little bit for all of our sakes what the clawback is, what that means for us moving forward?
The clawback is a set amount of fee that was set per house that's built in the TERS zone, that the city now charges the TERS in order to recover some of our expenses.
Essentially for police and whatnot, yeah. So the cost of doing business, if you will. So there's money exchanging both ways, it doesn't cover it all. The numbers for the first 10 years were in the $400 range, and then it goes up to $600 or something. And yeah, ultimately, I think it winds up being $1,000 per home. So there's something, a cost coming back to us. But right now, all we can see is last year's didn't come over. So we need to figure out for sure what that number is. But there's a possibility that something good, or something comes over to the good column. And Mayor, you noticed too the transfer in revenues. So this is without that right now, without that 800,000. So if nothing else changed, we're 935 upside down. So obviously that would be one way to capture it, is you just transfer it in. But we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to just keep it all as plain vanilla right now, so that every improvement will be more realized, I guess.
Absolutely.
Just so the council knows, I did do a tally of the wants. Just in personnel, you're talking a little over $1 million without benefits. That's just gross salary. That's not with the employer matches, insurances, nothing like that. Just on the extra employees that are required or asked for. As far as equipment, it's $1.2 million that they're asking for. What some of the departments and I are trying to do right now is look at the current budget, see if we can get rid of some of those smaller items that they asked for, so that we can buy them this year and not have that expense next year, if they have any leftover budget.
Now, based off of this, Rosie, do we have any sort of estimate as to within this current year's, fiscal year's budget, what we're going to have from an unused fund standpoint? Expenditures that weren't fully realized, along with how many expenditures were one-time expenditures that we're not going to need to make reoccurring for the upcoming year?
No, I don't, but I can get that number for you in the next meeting. Currently, we're still missing a lot of numbers, especially since a lot of these come in at the end of the year. The invoicing of the radio usage, the franchise fees is one of them that they normally come in August, September, sometimes even October. And we got to accrue for it in the current year.
Absolutely. And the reason why I think that that's an important piece of this puzzle, which I know we're putting together, still putting together all the puzzle pieces, and even trying to find some of the puzzle pieces, is that, roughly $280,000 for the expenditures within the current year's budget is for just two plans, the comp plan and the thoroughfare plan. So that money, even though that's technically been collected from a revenue standpoint and allocated from an expenditure standpoint, wasn't actually allocated, so that can carry over to this current year's budget and kind of fill that gap of something we need to do.
That becomes part of that transfer in money.
Yep.
Whatever we have left over this year, if we need to use it next year, we can do that transfer in there. But that doesn't become a little clearer till about end of August.
And then it looks like here, so sales tax would be within the miscellaneous tax revenue.
Yes.
That is looking like it's going to be down
Exactly.
within this current fiscal year, so we're projecting it to be down next year. But with H-E-B, McDonald's, maybe a Whataburger eventually coming online, we should hopefully start to see that climb back up. But there's an agreement for that area that there are certain reimbursement mechanisms there. Can you speak to the license and permit revenues? I'm assuming that's down just because growth has relatively slowed in Manvel. DeBello's mostly built out, Blue Water, et cetera.
That plus, some of the subdivisions that were set to start off earlier this year did not. They're barely getting off the ground right now. That's one. Two, construction did slow down, not only for the reasons you mentioned, but because of the materials. They were having a difficulty for getting a hold of a lot of those materials. Without construction, no building, no permits.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide unless anyone else has questions or comments. Yeah, absolutely.
The police department, the 606,000 increase, that's must be covering more than just a 3%. What else is in there?
It's also some of the smaller equipment he's requested, some of the contracts that he's going to need to increase because of the new laws that they now need to follow for the cameras and stuff like that.
So it's equipment, there's
Equipment.
personal equipment involved in there?
Personal
Okay.
equipment, smaller equipment, no vehicles.
Okay. Do you know how much of that 606 is for equipment?
I want to say it was at least half of it.
Half of it, yeah, that's, okay. Thank you.
So where we stand is kind of high level right now with these conservative numbers is, let's just say we don't transfer in any revenue, but there's a strong chance that we might have to do that. We're going to see a revenue decrease in the city if we keep the current tax rate by $3.1 million. But to meet some of the very simple and basic asks from the departments, we're going to need to increase expenditures by $935,000. So that means that we're going to run a deficit within this year's budget of roughly $4.1 million.
As you can see, the revenues, the highest ones, as we know, are the property tax, license and permits, and then our miscellaneous tax revenues, which are the sales tax. These are expenditures by department. Police department being a third of the expenditures. Administration 17%. Public Works 14%. The next one is your sales tax historical trend. That's since 2019. The blue line being MEDC, the red being the city, and the green being the total. We have some spikes and some downs. The spikes are usually the quarterly where they're doing the catch-up or paying us whatever they collected on the delinquents. The next one is your vehicle equipment replacement fund. This one, basically what happens is general fund puts in 200,000, utility fund puts in 80,000. And that's to replace actual vehicles that are on the road today if something happens. Not to buy new ones, but just to replace.
Rosie, a quick question for you on that. How much do we have currently sitting within that fund for vehicle replacement?
This year, we had 280,000, we spent 215,000, so we've got enough to buy at least one or two of the smaller vehicles there, or that need replacement.
Well, so let me rephrase my question, because I understand every year we don't fully spend from a vehicle and equipment replacement standpoint what we allocate from a fund standpoint. So not just for this current year-to-date activity, which looks like we're going to have roughly $91,000 to be able to put into the fund balance. How much is that unused fund balance total?
I did not get the totals for you, it's on my printer, but I can tell you that this is a fairly new fund. It was fairly created, I want to say 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So it's not a big number in there.
Okay, because if we can get that number, because an area of opportunity, just putting it out there, is that if we have a healthy fund balance sitting there that can carry us for a year within the utility fund, that saves $80,000 for Ray and his team, and then within the general fund, that's an additional $200,000 that we don't have to expend out, that we can find a savings there as well. But it all depends upon whether or not we have a healthy fund balance.
I'll look at it and get you the number for the next meeting.
Thank you, Rosie.
The next one is your debt service. And as you can see, I did do an increase for the new bond series out there on that one.
So Rosie, for this, how much with this new bond series, and I know I'm asking you some numbers on the fly here, what's the yearly debt payment that we're going to have to make for this new bond series?
For this next coming year, for the new bond series, you're paying $545,000 for the principal and $1.45 for the interest.
It's a lot of interest.
It starts
But
off that way, yes, sir.
it was a great interest rate that the city got in light of the times. It's just, I guess that's what happens when you take out debt for your home or your car. You're always paying more in interest than you're paying in principal.
At least at the beginning, yes.
Okay, so the 3.825, that's even for previous years' debt
Yes.
that we're making
Yes,
payments
sir.
on. Okay. Thank you.
The next one is your utility fund. I have, again, budgeted conservatively. I did increase the revenues by approximately a little less than 14%, which is what they were recommending on one of our things that they did, so that's what we would need to maintain our utility fund. Correct. I am doing a transfer in of $381,000 to be able to cover the utility site and make it solvent to make no profit. This is the one and only enterprise fund that we have with the city, so they're supposed to be able to pay for their own expenses for the most part. But if we don't do a water increase other than what they're requiring, this is what it's going to look like.
So a question for you, Rosie. This 381, is that to cover a currently existing deficit that's within the utility fund, or is that something that's going to be needed every
next
year?
year.
Every year moving forward, unless
No.
we continue to jack up the fees.
Exactly.
Okay. Because I was in a city council meeting when it was last presented to city council by Freeze and Nichols, who also did the thoroughfare study for us. It was presented as the utility fund was solvent. It was making money.
And maybe once we get all those added houses that we were supposed to get this year, it might make it solvent. But we don't know what I have to go with what the numbers that we have currently.
Gotcha. Because, yeah, it seems like there's a discrepancy there with what was presented previously to council based off of the actual facts that are before us, because, facts don't lie. And what this shows is that for everybody that currently is on city water and wastewater, that there's a chance that the city council might have to vote on increasing their fees 14% when we just had to carry the burden of an additional 13% just last year as well. Okay. Thank you, Rosie.
The next funds are all restricted funds. So what I've done is I put 2 or 3 funds in the same page. That way we go a little faster. Community impact fees, again, that's revenue that we don't know how much we're going to get until the actual developers come knocking on the door. So I just based it on what we had this year for the budget and hope for the best for next year. The same thing with the capital projects fund. I am estimating what the projects are supposed to be, but that number can change depending on the status of whatever projects we're currently working on this year if they don't get completed by the end of the year. But it has its fund balance to cover those projects in there. It's just a matter of transferring it in if we need to. Municipal court. The following 4 funds are for the municipal court. They're very restricted. The court is the only ones who can use it, and it's only for certain items. And these come out of the fines that we charge people who get a ticket. The jury cost, the court security fund, the truancy prevention fund, court technology fund. The same thing with the law enforcement fund. Whatever gets seized, the police is the only department that can use those funds. PEG funds. The PEG fund comes in part of our franchise fees, and those are also, you can only use it for certain things, educational, TV, broadcasting, stuff like that. TERS and SMDA. The TERS, as you can see, currently I'm budgeting at what we had this year until I get the final numbers for the TERS. Then I'll put in the correct number in there at the beginning of August. The same thing with the SMDA, because they do get part of the property tax and they get part of the sales revenue also.
Rosie, just real quick, Council, I did send y'all an overview of the TERS. Hopefully y'all got that email the other day. Did that kind of make sense that the boundary of the TERS is actually a little bit bigger than Meridiana MUDs? So it includes some of the stuff here on Highway 6. So that sales tax, half of it goes to that TERS as well. So maybe you already knew that, but I just sharing information.
Questions?
One question, and Rosie, thank you for, I know you've been putting a lot of work and a lot of long hours into these numbers, so thank you. And I know it's not easy to stand up there and to talk about the challenging situation that the city seemingly finds itself in from a budget standpoint. It's not, these are not, not a play on words, these are not rosy numbers. But, so one question that I have for you, in 2020, the city set aside $250,000 for a rainy day fund. In 2021 and 2022, it was set aside in the budget $500,000 each year for a rainy day fund. Is that recognized within this year's budget?
That, I believe, is part of your fund balance.
Okay.
So if we needed to touch the fund balance, that's what it's there for. Of course, we can't do it on a regular basis because then we will go below where we should go.
Of course. So each of the past 2 years, $500,000 has been set aside, plus year one, technically speaking, $250,000. So it's sitting at about 1.25. So if we didn't set aside an additional $500,000 in this year's budget, then that would open up an additional $500,000 from an allocation standpoint.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, council, questions, comments, thoughts?
The TERS, which is something I'm trying to grasp the idea around this. Is Meridiana the only one that has a TERS program? Valencia will not be involved in something like this?
Yeah, Valencia has a 380, which is similar, but currently, yes, Meridiana is the only TERS that we have, tax increment reinvestment zone. Manvel Town Center also has a reimbursement,
43?
MUD 43, right, as well.
And this, how far out is this payout projected? This-
40 years.
40 years.
From
40.
2010.
I'll be around then, won't I? Okay, thank you.
How do we get out of that? Is that possible? 40 years.
It would just take, we would just have to buy our way out, yeah, which I'm not sure how you would.
You have to understand things like the overpass over the
Yep.
railroad tracks and those pretty massive expenditures, which kind of go far beyond what we usually ask a developer to do. That was done through this TERS arrangement. It's also a pretty long road at Meridiana, is it the Meridiana Parkway that goes all the way into Meridiana from Highway 6? There's not anything else feeding really onto that can generate taxable value that pays for that. So there's a lot of things on this list, and that's what the TERS plan, when it was adopted, had this list of things that it was going to pay for. And that's why it's going to take a long time to pay some of that off.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to date, in fairness, they've spent $80 million plus just on TERS eligible projects, not to mention, their internal streets and infrastructure and all that kind of good stuff. But that's just on the water plant and the wastewater plant, Meridiana Parkway, the overpass. That's the 80 million that's in, I don't want to say in play, but that's just TERS related. So a developer has this enormous upfront cost, so they're still paid for everything up front. So they're getting reimbursed. It's not like, there was a check written up front because the city couldn't have done that. So I guess that's the way that, your predecessors saw fit to go ahead and approve it, because something is better than nothing, maybe. At some point we'll finally start realizing those property taxes, and we do get, 50% of the sales tax?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we get 50% of something is more than 0%,
And the
I suppose.
clawback.
And the clawback, right?
Will that be the same thing for the HEB complex?
HEBs.
That's a 380 agreement, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah. And it's
50,
similar, it's not as long-term, and I believe it's set at 45 or 50% of all property tax revenue until 2045, and then 45, 50% of all sales tax revenue until 2045 goes back to reimburse them until either a certain amount's reimbursed or you reach 2045.
And then Del Bello's, is that the 70%? That one's different, right? The MUD 43?
Yes, that's 70% and then partial sales tax also. And that's also out to 2049, 2050.
So Rosie, just a hierarchy question for you here. Based off of the estimated values, understanding a lot's still under protest, and you don't have the final numbers from the county yet, this tax rate, this is based off of the tax rate of 57 cents.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a feeling or a sense for what the tax rate range is going to be that's provided to us by the county?
No, sir.
Okay. So
I wish I did.
for council, what we get provided from the county is we get provided a no new revenue rate up to a voter approval rate based off of your recognized value. Council can adopt anything below the voter approval rate if we so choose. But if we want to adopt the tax rate above the voter approval rate, then it has to go to the voters for approval. If it goes to the voters for approval and it happens to fail, then Bobby, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to adopt the no new revenue tax rate as proposed from the range.
We have to check that every year because of the truth in taxation.
Changes all the time, right? Okay. So we'll know more probably on August 7th regarding what that range is.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I mean, that does kind of lead into a good question that you started out earlier. So this budget, that we owe to council August 1st, do we have a general sense of, playing it conservative at this point? I mean, just knowing that it's not going to be a balanced budget, other than the way we're presenting it right now. That sounds like an odd question. Is that okay? Or rather, just so that we're all on the same page, what is this nonsense that you've presented to us, Dan? This is horrible. What about all the things that we just heard about? Well, we can't present those, until we know for sure what's going to be there, so.
Well, I'll answer your question, Dan. I think
Okay.
I think you've, based off of what we see right now, you've got to play it conservative. I think it's just, you're already even playing it conservatively, you're running a deficit. I mean, there's opportunities where we can shrink that deficit, but even with taking the 500,000, taking the 200,000 from vehicle replacement, doing the clawback, that gets you closer, but you're still running a deficit there. I think if we go aggressive right now, I think we set ourselves up for failure. And the hope would be once we get the numbers back, we all of a sudden realize, oh, look, now we can do some additional things. What I would say is it really would be, Dan, you working with the team and kind of getting down to the weeds and saying, okay, what can we prioritize based off of this? I know one of the things we talked about that's a big priority for all of us is some sort of dependent coverage, a step system for that. If we can find ways to reallocate different funding within the departments based off of expenditures that have been made or unused funds that are available, that there's different ways that we can do things. But initially speaking, just looking at the numbers, I think we've got to play it conservative. But I'm open to council's suggestions and comments there. Councilman Perry?
Conservative.
And keep something in mind, you can always go back and modify amend the budget. So if we see that revenues are coming in and we can go out there and do some of the spending that we want to, we can do an amendment.
Correct. And we have August, once we get the numbers, to continue to work through this. We have September to continue to work through this, and you're correct. I know neighboring cities, all of a sudden, new development comes in and wants to get started, and you enter into some development agreements in January, and they have to pay these different fees, and you get to recognize you can't necessarily always predict as hard as you try, you can't predict what the future holds.
Do we have any idea from now till the end of the year, how many new home sites we're looking at?
Sure, that's exactly what I was going to mention. So Valencia hasn't started in earnest as far as the homes getting constructed yet. So that's the big one that Rosie was talking about. So Meridiana it's almost a neutral. It doesn't really help us, I suppose, as far as other than the little bit of permit fees and whatnot. But Valencia, that one does significantly impact us. So they're pushing to get started this year. Just like anything else, I know that they're ready to start building homes. We meet with them every month, and they're ready. They've done a significant amount of upfront work, with the roads. I don't know if y'all have been out there, if you watch any of the drone footage that we put out on a regular basis, but that's their hope. Other than that, Lakeland's built out, Blue Water Lakes is built out, Terra Estates is built out. So there's always something going on in Pomona, but again, that's ETJ, so we don't realize those, city taxes anyway.
Any comments?
I'm trying to hold back. What about the businesses? I know that we get tax revenue from the homes and getting those built as soon as possible. And I know all of Houston, Texas wants to move to Manvel because it's the city on the rise. Shameless plug out there. But we really need to figure out a way to make, we've talked about this, how to get more businesses here that want to do business with us and rebuild relationships with the developers. I know many don't like to hear that, but I have spoken to community members and there's a sense that there's been broken trust, broken relationships, and whether they were warranted or not, we really have to figure out a way as a city to re-engage and really, help the development where it needs to happen so that we do not raise taxes. Because when you look at it, this is scary. It doesn't look it doesn't look rosy. I'm sure with your intelligence and your background and everybody coming together, I'm confident that we can come up with a very feasible budget plan. I'm very confident in you and your expertise and our hires here, Dan and everybody else, all the department heads. But we do not want to lose sight of trying to make the city amicable for businesses as well, right?
I just want to stay with the fact that I put my weight fully behind remaining conservative. There are too many unknowns. There's an unpredictable future, anything can impact the economy in these next coming 12 to 18 months, we have to remain conservative.
I personally would love to see us be heavier on our personnel and our salaries. We know more money's coming. I think next year is going to be a much brighter year than this year. It's obvious. I know we want a new road topping machine, but if we could hold back on some of these equipments, just a little bit longer, and try to build up our police officers or staff that I feel are behind, and that's where my heart lies, is trying to get these people's salaries up. We all get up in the morning, put our pants on for that dollar, and it's.
Some few minor calculations, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I did calculate that 24 of our employees are under 50,000 a year. And if we give them an extra 2% to bring them up a little bit, it will only cost the city about 25,000. So that would be a good help there for the lower end. We have 40 employees between the 50 to 70K range and 34 over the 70 range. The cost of living for the 3% is costing about $222,000. If we go 5%, it's $370,000, about $148,000 more.
Mayor, if I could ask, that kind of dovetails into what we want to ask, and it seems odd, in the situation what we just presented, but hearing from all the different department heads, and, we don't have you probably don't have a table in front of you with all of those different asks, but did anything stick out? Right now, this is sort of internally, like Rosie said, 3% here, the minor equipment, but this is us trying to fit in there. Is there anything that council would like to make sure, whatever you do at all costs, get this thing, whatever that thing is, Councilman Lands, you just sort of alluded to, try and, if we have to go one or the other, lean heavy on employees as opposed to equipment. That's good input. Is that kind of the will of the council?
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great input.
Okay.
Because the theme of the budget is back to the basics.
Right.
Not saying we have to forego the needs and the technology, but we got to take care of the employees. And as we keep and retain quality employees that care about their job, that care about the success of the community, then they'll go and they'll meet with a resident and stand here in the lobby like Robbie did the other day, our Director of Community Services, and talk with the resident to ease them of some of their concerns and their frustrations. So I would agree with that. I know, Dan, and that's a phenomenal question that you asked. I think we have this printout that you provided us from a road funding standpoint. I think that's a very important thing that I've heard from the community as a need that they have. And then if there's a way to, in regards to either, if we have to kind of pick or choose, I know for the chief being able to recruit employees, the cadet program was an ask that stood out to me. And then from a permitting standpoint was the checklist to feed into MyGov. I think those were asks that stood out to me. Those were asks that stood out to residents who reached out to me. So if we are able to make those things work, I'm not saying those are you have to do those, but those are ones that piqued my interest.
That's exciting to hear. I think we actually realized we might be able to work the Camino software into this year's budget, actually. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned it already, and Dan, I know it's an important thing for you, and I applaud you for this. The dependent coverage, looking to do a step program. I think that's, as Councilman Land said, that's leaning heavy on the employee side rather than necessarily the equipment side. Because as Rosie, you're looking at things, and I think from an equipment standpoint, there's grant opportunities if council has an appetite to look at different grant opportunities to help us secure equipment and potentially some infrastructure needs. Because y'all, the reality is that very soon here, we're going to have to talk about a $40 million wastewater treatment plant. We just issued $40 million, and we see how that hits the budget. So we got to make sure to keep that in the back of our mind as well. Any other comments or direction that we can provide Dan and the team?
I think for me, I think everyone already knows that I stand heavily with the employees. I think that, yes, we need to look at the balance of what are some of the equipment needs that are asked so that they can do their job properly. But I think when we look at the priority of what are we trying to allocate, what are we trying to do, we have to prioritize our human capital. Because if you don't feel valued, you're not going to do a good job. And I've seen people go over and above with what they have when they feel valued and they feel like their families are taken care of. And I have been getting emails from citizens saying, don't raise the police's money, don't give them a raise. I'm sorry, Mrs. Whoever you are, but in this case, I think that from my experience in corporate business building, and just the people business, is we have to prioritize you guys. We absolutely have to. And so I love that we're doing a step plan. I think stepped incentivization to encourage loyalty. And yes, we want to provide employees with the tools to do a good job. For me, that looks like training, customer service, how to talk to people, how to communicate and connect, giving them hard news with a smile on their face. That's a big thing. And then secondly, prioritizing, I understand we have wants. Everybody's always going to have wants. And I wish we could snap our fingers and undo some of the decisions that were made in the past so that we're not in the pickle we're in today. But moving forward, I would like to see the priorities of what you said. You asked us, what is it that we see? I think that we come together and we look at what does the city need to move forward effectively, efficiently, without sacrificing our human capital as we've done for so long.
Mayor, can I ask, since there's some discussion about the STEP program again, if Chad is here too, if we wanted to hone in, I don't want to get into too many details, but if y'all had some time to think about that on, where do we start out? Because I think Chad had presented a certain percentage, maybe 25% with new employees, and there was some discussion, maybe not at the council level, maybe it was one-on-one conversations, but maybe starting at a higher percentage. Have y'all had any more time to think about that or provide direction on that?
Forgive me, a higher percentage on what specifically?
I'm so sorry.
I lost
Yep,
you there.
that's
Sorry,
okay.
that's me.
No, I didn't couch that very well. So dependent coverage. One of the options that Chad had presented was, day one, the new employee gets 50% or 25% towards dependent coverage. They still get 100% towards employees, but perhaps they get 25%, perhaps they get 50%, whatever, a certain number. And then after you've been here, I think Chad had mentioned 5 years, then they would go up to 50%. And some of y'all said, well, how about maybe 3 years instead of, so just kind of, since we've got a couple minutes, if we kind of want to flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I actually love that idea. I know that it's not the best thing right away for employees. Again, as the only mother, not father, on council, it's difficult. When your child gets sick, Dan, you just had a sick child, had to go to the ER. It's not easy. And when you want to have productive employees, we want to have peace of mind. And the one thing that is going to affect us is our family. And if we want to give our best and do our best, we need to feel safe. And especially our police officers and city staff, we need to feel like we're being taken care of, just like we're taking care of our city. That's just it. So the STEP plan, I like it. I do. I think 3 years is a little more, it's more doable instead of, gosh, they just don't offer it, there's no hope. And then maybe compensate a little more with what you're asking is just a little raise here to offset those costs and find some middle ground. I like that, honestly. I still would like to see the numbers and how much we would be saving, specifically bringing it to a 3-year step, and what that looks like with raises, what the dependent coverages would be, and just kind of see those to make an educated decision.
Councilman Perry, you had said 2 or 3 years as well, right?
Yeah, I remember from the discussion, we thought 5 years was too long
Right.
of a period, so we were asking for something within a 2 to 3 year period, however it could be fit in, because I remember the horror of when Chad was making his presentation to realize the cost
Yeah.
for family coverage.
It is.
That We've really got to work on that.
And then at some point, would it be council's desire to have 100% dependent coverage once they've been here for X number of years? Or do we
Yes.
ever want to try and get to that point?
Yes.
Those
Yeah,
numbers.
let's get a forecast. Let's kind of a
Okay.
few different models,
Okay.
if possible.
You got it?
And I think doing a shorter first year, maybe starting off with something not 50%, but 25% or below, and let's see what the financial impact
Okay.
that would be. And then I know Councilman Lance has something. What I'll say, Rosie, that I like that you presented as well, is that there are some employees that might benefit from a 5% pay increase. Not everybody. Speaking from personal experience, when I've been at jobs and everybody just gets a 3% increase, and you look at your quality of work compared to others, knowing that they got the exact same raise as you, even though you've busted your butt every single day, it demotivates you, and you start looking elsewhere because you're like, how is that fair? How is that right? So really working with the department heads and targeting how can we get to the people where they need to be based off of their service to the community, because at the end of the day, the reason why we're all here is to serve the community. I think that's something that, not saying we don't just do a flat 3% or whatever that it is, but I think we need to evaluate it on a case-by-case scenario to make sure that the employees deserve what they get. They've worked hard, they deserve to get paid for working hard. But
Performance.
Councilman Lands.
Yes, piggybacking what Crystal said is, and I'm not always trying to sound like I look like the golden, end of the golden rainbow all the time, but this is something else that's obviously going to change over the next year or 2 years. We can take another look at it. So you know what? We have the money coming in now. That's one of the things we can reevaluate and maybe change the dependents and how much we're giving, the employees. It may not be a 2-year or 3-year plan or whatever. May be able to change that. So, and like you said, the 3% across the board, if we could, who knows what the number is? Look at an extra 1% or 2% for those exceptional employees, that have gone up, above and beyond, and they just, the stars of our group, then they get maybe a little bit more.
Absolutely. Brooke, can you just highlight for us very briefly, I believe that we've had an overwhelming response on the survey. Do you have what the current numbers are on that?
I do. We're closing in on 600 responses.
That's phenomenal. And when do you think we'll be able to start kind of diving into that a little bit?
Well, we already have a little bit. I've been keeping in touch with Rosie and just letting everybody know where we're standing, because you can see kind of trends of where everything is going. But it closes this Friday, and I'm going to say we'll have them by next Monday. So
Awesome, because I think as we talk about the budget, factoring in the community's input into it is going to be a key thing for the decisions that we make here. Dan, are there any questions, additional questions that you've heard from staff that you need to ask us?
Nothing else comes to mind. I think we've hit all of the big ticket items that are out there. I mean, we do have one small little item that we need to address if we can before PD&Z starts over. We have our very important ordinance reading tonight.
Absolutely, we can move to that one. And Dan, what I'll ask you to do is just as you maybe by Wednesday or Thursday or so, if you feel, and you and I can talk,
Sure.
if we feel that it's prudent to have another special workshop this upcoming Monday,
Right.
we'll kind of gauge where you guys are at and what you need from us.
Tammy, when would we need to call that? By Tuesday or Wednesday?
Tomorrow's special meeting, so we can discuss it at. My guess is that special meeting would be that last Monday in the month, right?
Right.
So we can, council or you guys can decide at Monday's council meeting, and then I don't have to post that agenda till the following Friday.
So I think
It's Monday. It's 1 week from today.
So we would need to post it by Friday if we're going to have it on.
I'm sorry, I'm a week ahead of
That's okay.
myself. Where has this month gone? Yes, I'll have to post it by Friday.
By Friday.
By
okay.
Friday. Okay.
Okay. Because I know, just counsel for our information, that one of the things that Tammy's going to need is regarding the tax rate, as that, depending upon what we want to do with that drives holding public hearings. Public hearings have to be posted. There's a very tight schedule that needs to be followed with that. So we'll need to make a decision very soon on that piece of it. So Dan, we'll circle up on potentially a special meeting if needed, but this isn't going to be the last that we're talking about the budget. Let's move on to the regular agenda. That way we can knock this out before PD&Z, because PD&Z has a very riveting conversation about a gas station coming up. So we have consideration and possible action to approve the first of two readings of ordinance 2023-0-26. Dan.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So this has been a hot topic lately. The department is currently called the Community Services Department, and that is in an ordinance fashion. It's actually in the org chart. What I had hoped to do was bring a revised org chart to you, and just working through that process internally, I think it's best for that to wait until council makes the final determination on the city manager position. Just if it goes a different way, for instance, the new manager might want to change something else. So we can hold off on that. But as far as holding off on getting Robbie new shirts and business cards, we wanted to abide by the formal name of this department. And if everyone's okay with it, we would like to change the name formally to Public Works Department.
I have a question. I remember there was a split here, right? Somebody wanted, what was it, community services? Was that what?
The one and only gentleman you're talking about.
Public Works.
He's right there.
So is this because you got promoted and you get to name it?
Crystal just stirring the pot here.
I'm just stirring the pot. I'm just saying, I remember that. So, all right. Thank you so much.
All right. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously 6-0. Any mayor or council comments? No, but what I'll just ask is that council, if we just turn around these name tags up at the front for PD&Z before we go. So with that, I will make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously 6-0. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rosie.